Well, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. The market's changing. I think we're all aware of that. It's actually been changing since the start of the year. The number of buyers out there in the marketplace has diminished, and the number of transactions has diminished. Now, because the number of listings has also diminished, we've seen the prices continue to rise. In fact, in January and February, we saw unprecedented increase in prices. They steadied a little bit in March, but in the first quarter of the year, we gained 13.6% compared to how we ended the year in December of 2021. But we've seen a shift even more dramatic in April because more inventory is coming on the market. So as the inventory increases, the number of months of sustainable inventory is higher than it is before. Supply and demand says you're going to get a little bit of downward pressure on price. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing prices down. I haven't seen the figures yet, but I'm guessing 5-6% in April. Nothing huge, but it is somewhat of a decline. Now, when you consider how much the market gained in January, February, March, we're still significantly ahead of where we ended up the year last year. So it's been a positive, but we're seeing a trend. And of course, the media is jumping on this and pronouncing the end of the era of real estate gains, and they're forecasting all kinds of gloom and doom. And buyers read this. And buyers listen to this on the radio and watch it on television, and buyers become alarmed. So what we're going to see, and we're starting to see it a little bit, is buyers who are beginning to second guess their decision to buy the property. They start to think, well, maybe I paid too much. Maybe I shouldn't go ahead with this purchase. And they get cold feet. Well, can they get out of the deal? That's the first thing they're going to ask themselves. Can they get out of the deal? And there's two stages I want to talk about. The first is conditional offers. It can be conditional on, for example, financing or building inspection. And I like to think of them as options to purchase because certainly the buyer can get out of the deal. Now, the buyer has to demonstrate that he's bargaining in good faith. So if he makes it conditional on a building inspection, he needs to get a building inspection. He makes it conditional on financing, he needs to pay application for financing. It isn't enough to just say, I changed my mind. But I can remember very early in my real estate career when we had a buyer's market and 2/3 of the inventory that came on the market expired unsold, and I sold a property to an engineer who had an excellent job and stellar credit, and he made it conditional on financing. He was a middle-aged gentleman, and he was very nervous. And he changed his mind. He wanted out. Well, the seller didn't want him out because the seller wanted to sell the property. So I said to him, I said, you know, it's conditional on financing. You have to act in good faith. He brought me a letter from his manager saying he made an application for a mortgage and it was declined. So I called the manager. I said, what's this all about? The guy has excellent credit and a good job, and I know how much he's earning. And the manager said, look, I'm not going to give somebody a mortgage who doesn't want one. So what happened? As a good client, he went into the bank manager, said, I want this letter, and the manager gave him one. So, and of course, with the building inspection, it says that the building inspection has to be to the satisfaction of the buyer at his sole and absolute discretion. Well, there's going to be some deficiencies in every building inspection. Maybe the roof's 15 years old, maybe the furnace is a little tired, and the buyer can just say, I'm not satisfied, I'm walking. So those are options. But what about if the deal is firm, it's unconditional, and the buyer changes their mind? Well, there's things the buyers will do. One of the things they'll do is not bring in a deposit. A second thing that they may do is refuse to sign the acknowledgement on the agreement of purchase and sale or on the confirmation and cooperation. It may be that they don't tell us who their lawyer is, or it may be that they don't return phone calls. You start getting these signals, and what should you as a realtor do? Well, first of all, it's very important that you keep your seller in the loop. Your seller has to know. And then the seller's going to have to make some decisions. The first thing you need to do, if you're representing the buyer, is sit down with the buyer and try and rekindle the dream. Why did you want to buy this house? And encourage them, if they're just having second thoughts, encourage them to continue on with the transaction. If they're kind of vehement that they're not going to do that, refer them to their lawyer. Now, some lawyers will say, you can walk away from it. They're not going to do anything. Or other lawyers will say, look, you signed the contract, fulfill the contract, go ahead with the transaction. And so that's the first step. If a deposit is not tendered, see what your seller thinks about it. We had a seller fairly recently who was delayed and delayed and delayed in getting the deposit. The buyer wasn't bringing it in, giving excuse after excuse. It was 3 weeks before the buyer brought the deposit in. But the seller said, I want this deal. I don't want to jeopardize it. Let's give them more time. Let's give them more time. The deal ultimately closed. So get your seller involved. But if the deposit is not coming in and you've got every reason to believe the buyer's changed his mind, the seller needs to send a letter, or you on behalf of the seller, to the buyer, giving them, for argument's sake, 48 hours to tender the deposit, failing which we're going to assume that you're not bargaining and acting in good faith. We're going to put the property back on the market for sale in an attempt to mitigate damages. Put them on notice that you're going to be coming after them for any shortfall and any damage and any out-of-pocket expenses. Now, why do you do that now instead of waiting to closing? Because as the seller, you don't want to be right at closing, got a moving truck in the driveway, and all your furniture going into the moving truck to find out that the buyer is not going to close. You want to know now so that you can put it back on the market and you can make plans. At the same time, you want to make sure that you cover your bases with the seller, or with the buyer, I'm sorry, so that the door is open for litigation. And you want to make sure that you've done the right things so that it's clear that the buyer is in breach, not the seller in breach. And you as a realtor need to walk your seller through these important steps and guide them along. Now, whether or not they will ultimately sue is a practical question, and they can come to that after they've sold the property to somebody else. It may be that the cost of litigation and the delay in the courts doesn't justify the process. The chances are, if they do go to court, the judge will award them certainly the deposit and probably damages for the process. The odds are they're not going to award them specific performance and force the buyer to buy, but it's still worth the process depending on how much money is at stake when they ultimately sell to somebody else. I hope these things make sense. Hopefully we don't have to cross this bridge too often, but we're going to see it from time to time. We need to know what's at stake, and we need to act prudently. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to talking to you again very soon.